In this video, we're going to be reviewing the Palmetto State Armory, or PSA Compact Dagger. If you're not familiar with PSA or Palmetto State Armory, you're probably not alone. A little bit of history on Palmetto State Armory. It was founded in South Carolina back in 2008 by Jamin McCallum. And they started initially selling magazines and ammo online, and eventually were known for their AR lines. But outside of retail stores, especially those in Carolina, where they actually have their own retail stores, they primarily sell online. So if this is a new gun to you, that's largely because you probably haven't seen it anywhere else outside of the Carolinas or a gun show. Now, the Dagger was initially introduced back at the 2020 SHOT Show and was released later that year. Basically, this is a Glock 19 Gen 3 clone. So there are interoperable parts except for a couple pieces on the rail system, which I'll talk about, but almost everything else is interchangeable with the Glock Gen 3. And the reason why you're starting to see these Glock clones coming out is patents in the United States typically expire after 20 years. And the Glock patents, for example, on the Glock Gen 3 had recently expired. That's why you start seeing these types of clones popping up in the marketplace. So looking real quick at the Dagger, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things I really like about the Dagger. So the first thing is based off of the Glock 19, which some claim is arguably the best Glock of them all because it ultimately is a size that allows you to do all types of things from concealed carry to tactical use to etc. Some of the other things I really like about Palmetto State Armory is every gun that they sell has a lifetime warranty. So if you have any issues around the gun, their service department is known for being very, very good. And a lot of the people speak very highly about that. This has much better ergonomics than a Glock. And when you look at, for example, the Glock 19, if you've ever picked up a Glock and it just felt blocky and unnatural in your hand, that all kind of goes away, at least it does for me, with the PSA, because there's a lot of things they've done here that really are big improvements to Glock, which quite honestly is something that the Glock Gen 3 should have been decades ago. But again, there's always that innovation problem with Glock. Why didn't they make these improvements? Well, PSA, companies like PSA came along and they figured it out, right? So all the things that we normally do with a Glock, the typical Glock mods, right? So you have the undercuts on the trigger guard, etc. The traditional Glock hump is gone, and instead it's got a tapered, round, beveled handle, and then the texture on the grips are actually excellent as well. But really, the way that you can only explain this to somebody is by picking one up and putting it in your hand. It just is markedly different than, for example, my Glock 19, which again, if you see my Glock videos, you know I do a lot of modifications on it because I just hate the ergonomics of the Glock. But all that goes away with the PSA Dagger, and that's something that they just did an absolutely phenomenal job on this gun. There's also some things on here that I like better than the Glocks as well. So for example, some of the better quality materials. So the slide, the barrel, the guide rod are all stainless steel as opposed to a Glock 19, which are not. They also look a lot less blocky. So when you look at, for example, the slides, when you compare the two side by side, you can tell that, you know, they're common, but when you fire the Dagger, you don't feel like you're firing a Glock. They just don't seem as blocky as a Glock. In fact, if anything, when you look at the slide at least, it looks very similar to, and it has very similar contours to, a SIG. So they almost took many of the contour changes that they put into the SIGs and then incorporated that into the cuts that they did on the slide, which are really nice, all the way down the frame and then around the edges, etc. Again, making it much less blocky, but much better in my opinion. The other thing is it also uses most of the parts for Glock are interchangeable, including magazines. So you can use standard Glock 19 magazines if you already have those, or the PMag magazines, etc. They all work in here similar to what you would normally see within a Glock. So again, if you have those investments, you can use those again. Now, one of the other cool things about Palmetto State Armory currently is these are commonly sold as packages. So you'll buy, like, for example, when I bought this Dagger, I bought it with the gun, the case, and 10 of these PMags. Now, we could argue all day whether or not the PMags are better than the Glock magazines. Personally, I think the Glock magazines are a little bit better, mostly because of the inserts, etc. But so when I carry, for example, I'll always use my Glock magazines. But if I'm out practicing and I need additional magazines, the PMags are just fine. And that's what I use them for anyways. But in the case when I bought this gun, and normally I don't like talking about pricing because pricing changes a lot online. But in this case, what I did is I bought this with the gun, the case, and the mag. So the gun, the case, and then 10 PMags. And I got all of this for $350. So basically, if you think about when you normally buy a Glock, you get 3 magazines with that. So in addition, you're getting 7 additional magazines, which all are valued currently at about $15 a magazine. So really, when you minus out the value of the magazines that came with it, the gun was basically about $250, which is about half of the price of a Glock 19. And that's what makes this so phenomenal. And that's why a lot of people look at this and saying, whoa, wait a second, why are they doing this so cheap? Well, the reason why they're doing it so cheap is because they want to do it that way, right? They're cutting out a lot of the middlemen. So they're cutting out the wholesalers and the retailers before you ever have to buy a gun that have to do their markups on the guns. They don't. They want to sell them directly to the consumers. So oftentimes when people will look at a price like this for $350 for everything that I bought, they might say, well, there might be a quality problem with this. And actually, there's not. In some cases, as I just alluded to, especially with the quality of the materials used, in my opinion, it's a little bit better than the Glocks. So that is one of the reasons why they're able to save so much money, is to be able to sell direct to consumers largely online. Now, what are some of the things I don't like about this? Well, the first thing you're going to notice is if you've ever worked on a Glock or a Glock 19, for example, there are push pins. And you have one push or trigger pin here, but the push pins here, they actually are utilizing currently roll pins. And again, these work fine, but I would prefer to have push pins, especially if you are in the habit of wanting to disassemble often your Glocks for cleaning or modifications, etc. If you've ever worked pins, you'll know that they're kind of a pain in the ass to work with. And that's one of the reasons why, again, I'm not a big fan of pins. Would it prevent me from buying the Dagger? Absolutely not. But it's just something that if I were to change, I would have push pins instead. There are still only limited to Gen 3 parts as well. So for example, if you're a lefty, you're basically not going to like the Gen 3, right? That's where you would probably want to go with the Glock Gen 5, because then you have ambidextrous types of functions, where again, you're limited right now, at least currently, to only Gen 3 parts for this. These are still relatively new. So you're going to see some videos and people out talking about things such as, trigger pin drifts and things of that nature, and maybe some malfunctions on the slide release. Again, I haven't had any of these problems. These might have been early on problems, etc. But again, if you're covered with a really good warranty like they are, they will fix any of those issues that you have. But again, I haven't witnessed any of those problems with my Dagger. Now, the other thing I would talk about is a little bit that I'm not a big fan of is the trigger release button is a little stiff. So the spring in here is pretty stiff. You have to get a good pinch on that to pop it out. Now, some people might really like that, but when I compare that, for example, to my Glock, my Gen 4s, these are much easier to actuate than the mag release here. So it's pretty stiff. Now, I could change that out by simply lightening the spring on it, but again, that's just something that you should be aware of as well. The other thing about this is you're going to notice this is not the stock trigger on here. I actually installed a Apex trigger. Now, this is the stock trigger that comes with the Dagger, and it is a 2-piece trigger, so it doesn't have the dongle. It's more like the M&P type triggers that you would see. I didn't mind this trigger. A lot of people have complained about not really liking the stock triggers much in the Daggers. Well, one of the first things I did when I bought it is I did fire about 300 to 400 rounds through it, and of course I polished up all the trigger components, etc. And I got it basically down to about 4.2 pounds. And quite honestly, if I was only using this pistol for home defense or just self-defense passively, etc., that trigger would have been fine. In fact, I would have kept that in here. However, I wanted to actually fire it more and use it more. So therefore, I did install the Apex trigger, which you can see here, which is, again, if you've done Glock mods, it's really not that hard to do. It's pretty simple. This is the kit that they come within. And it was a pretty quick swap out, that with the Ghost connector as well. So again, it just made the trigger pull much better on here. So now I'm to the point where, again, all my guns have been safety checked before. Got a really nice 90-degree break. Very nice audible reset. And the final thing I would note about the stock trigger is the stock trigger actually is really not that bad. In fact, I actually liked it a little bit better than the Glock triggers. Both triggers are not that great that typically come with Glocks. So again, this is a simple swap out that I put in here from Apex that I really liked. Another con, especially if you have a Glock 19 now, is if you have Kydex holsters or holsters you like to carry outside of your holsters, etc., this will typically not fit. They usually go in very tight, and a lot of it has to do with some of the slight contour differences, for example, in the trigger guard and things like that, which prevent this from working well into a Glock 19 holster. So again, if you have a really great Kydex holsters you like to use for your Glock 19, you're going to probably need a reholster with this gun. Now, I will say for you outside the waist belt carry people, one of the greatest holsters I've ever found, and just to add on here, is this Bianchi 101-10. This is something I use quite a bit, and these are in my opinion, one of the best holsters ever, because it basically sits through your belt loops and you can slip in all types of handguns, including a Glock 19. And honestly, this is, in my opinion, one of the best holsters ever for the Glock 19 if you like carrying outside the waistband. So you can save yourself a little money anyways. Just pick up one of these, and chances are any medium-sized handgun you'll be able to use with this as well. So just a little suggestion there. As far as caliber and capacity, this is a 9mm. It can use 15-round stock Glock magazines as well as PMags. So anything that you have is Glock compatible will work on there from the magazine perspective. Action and operation. It's a simple striker fire, very similar to Glock. So if you're used to using a Glock, it'll look very similar for you. The trigger pull on the stock trigger that comes with the handgun, I got it down to about 4.2 pounds on my alignment gauge. With the Apex trigger, I get it down to now about 3.6 pounds, which is exactly where I want that to be. As far as ergonomics and weight, again, we talked about some of the differences of why I like this better than the Glock, but as far as weight is concerned, it comes in around 1 pound, 5.4 ounces, which again, very similar to a Glock 19. I don't want to measure it against a Glock 19 because I've got a laser on mine. But again, it's very similar in that regard. And then when you look at them side by side, again, very similar guns, similar height, similar length, etc. The major difference, however, comes into the ergonomics. And again, it might be a little hard to see on the video, but there is some slight differences that make huge differences in this handgun as far as the ergonomics and how it feels to fire this. Another nice thing that I think PSA did was they put this cuts on the side at the bottom of the frame as well, so if you need to pull out your magazine, you can do that. I remember Glock at one time, they put cuts in the front and back. If anybody remembers those, it was a terrible idea. They did away with that, but again, this is a nice little benefit that they have on the PSA as well from the ergonomics perspective. Takedown and cleaning, again, very similar to a Glock. You got your takedown wings here, so again, you just pull it, and then you can quickly disassemble the firearm. Now, just looking real quick at some of the major differences here, as I alluded to, one of the main differences you're going to see between the Glock and the Dagger is the front locking block right here is integrated into the rail, and then you have a rear rail insert as well. So those are the major differences you're going to see between a Glock and a Dagger. Those are unique to the Dagger, not to the Glock. Everything else that you can utilize is standard Glock Gen 3 type things. So triggers, assemblies, etc., etc. So those are the major differences between the two. So, and again, the only other knock that I would have on this is, again, roll pins are a little tedious to knock out. So if you've ever worked with roll pins before, you just want to make sure you have a punch that is the circumference of the roll pins, and you want to be able to push them out that way and push them back in without really damaging the frame, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like roll pins. Some of the options, again, standard Glock parts you can put on here, etc. They also have a full-size version, so the Glock 17, so you would have a little bit longer grip. They also have the options for a longer slide to mimic a Glock 17, as well as this size slide, for example, with threaded extended barrels, etc. There are also optics cuts on a lot of the Daggers you will see online through their website, etc. So there's a lot of things you can do and add to it, similar to what you would do with a Glock. Again, accuracy, very similar to a Glock. I shoot almost the exact same groups that I do with this that I do with the Glock 19. So again, no real benefit there. So what are the major comparisons to the Glock 19, as I just alluded to earlier? First off, stainless steel barrel, slide, and guide rod. I personally like that better. I like that on my guns. If you've ever owned a Glock and you've been in wet environments, etc., they do have a tendency to rust at times. This is something that's going to help prevent that. They have that unique locking block and rear assembly like I talked about earlier, whereas Glocks typically have them integrated into the rail. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a tried and true system that Glocks have had for a long time, but again, it was just a small modification they made on the Dagger. They come with standard steel sights. So in this case, for example, I have a 3-dot sight system that came with it. One of the things I always do is I just paint my front sight with a bright orange, again, to make it stand out. But one of the knocks on a lot of Glocks, especially the base packages when they come out, is they come out with plastic sights or polymer sights, which again might not be a problem. It is, however, largely a polymer handgun, right? But in this case, they do come with steel sights, and you can buy both the 3-dot as well as the night sights as well. They have flushed tapered barrel for rifling protection. So for example, when you look at the front of the gun and look at it down, you're going to see, for example, with the Glock, the barrel sticks out a little bit. And some people like that, but notice on the Dagger, it's flush, and it's also tapered cut on the barrel as well. So what that helps prevent is, in case you ever knock the barrel, etc., and possibly damage the end of the barrel, you can sometimes throw off the accuracy or mess up the rifling. This is one of the prevention pieces you have in here with the Dagger, which again, I think is better than the Glock to help protect the barrel. As we mentioned before, it has a flat face 2-piece trigger, so M&P style, again, compared to the doggle safety that you would typically see on a Glock. So that's one of the other major differences. Again, I replaced that with the Apex trigger. Again, the grip module, that's the main differences here. It is absolutely fantastic in the hand, at least for me. Now, I have an average size hand, and this is absolutely perfect. I don't need to do anything with it. It has the typical undercutting of the guard, excellent stippling, magwell cuts, etc. It has a single finger groove. So one of the things that was a little controversial up until the Gen 5s where they flattened it out was the finger grooves and how well that worked for people with bigger hands, etc. Again, this just has one on there, which I think is just perfect. I think that will be the case for most people unless you have really, really large size hands. In that case, you might want to go with the full size grip as opposed to the compact. It also has a slightly larger beaver tail on the end as well, and it's kind of hard to see here a little bit, but the beaver tail does stick out slightly compared to the Glock, which actually makes a big difference, especially if you've ever had to deal with the Glock slide bite, which is something that people don't really like to deal with. The other thing is they did away with the Glock hump. Now, it might not seem like it there but it's more narrow, and it just feels really comfortable to shoot. And this, honestly, if you've ever picked up a Glock and you still pick up a stock Glock without any modifications, and it just feels awkward in your hand, and then you fire it, it's only going to feel worse when you fire it. If that's the case, and you've always stayed away from Glocks for a long time, try one of these. It's just a huge difference, etc. As far as utility, again, it's a Glock 19 clone. It is a do-it-all kind of carry gun for carry, tactical. Even the Navy SEALs use it, right? So it's just a great handgun, size, design, etc. So overall value, the Dagger is, in my opinion, does something that Glock should have been doing decades ago, which is they should have been innovating a lot of the issues that people had, that they had to continue to make Glock mods on, as opposed to guns that perfect straight out of the box, many of which are like, for example, the SIGs, etc. But if you really hated the Glock largely because of the ergonomics, you might actually really like the Dagger. And the Dagger is actually bringing me back to my Glocks. But I'm not going back to my Glocks. I'm going now to the Dagger. And you'll see that this really is, in my opinion, the highest value Glock clone on the market today. There's a lot of copies out there, but again, at the prices I just talked about earlier, this is a huge value for what you get. It doesn't feel like you're firing a Glock. When you fire this, when you look down the barrel at it, when you're holding it, it just doesn't feel like a Glock, but it has all the benefits of what a Glock is with the simplicity and proven design. Another thing I would recommend is when you go to the Palmetto State Armory website, sign up for their newsletter as well. They also send out great daily deals that come out, which oftentimes includes these packages of these Daggers and other types of things that they're selling. So again, they're selling the majority of these online, and they're transferring them through to your FFL. So in this case, for example, sign up for the newsletter as well. You'll be really surprised at how great a deals you can get. Ultimately, people love Daggers and PSA. And you really might want to start thinking about buying one of these now while these products are such a great deal, because as the word's getting out, the demand's going to continue to grow for these things. And people really that own Daggers and have been firing them just absolutely love buying them and swear by them. So the other cool thing that I really like about PSA is they're constantly making innovations. And one of the things that they came out with, and they talked about the Last Shot show, is called the Dagger Switch. And basically what this is a serialized trigger group for a Glock. And I think this will be pretty revolutionary because arguably that's one of the main reasons why Glock lost the military contract to SIG, is because SIG was able to create these fire control units so you could pop in and out of the frames and then put different slides on them, etc. And that was one of the main reasons why Glock lost that. Well, ultimately what PSA is trying to do now, and hopefully they will with the Dagger Switch or whatever they want to eventually call it, is they're going to create a pop in and out trigger serialized group similar to what they did with the SIG. And if they did this arguably is what Glock should have done decades ago. And they probably would have got the military contract. They probably would have had a lot more people using Glocks. And it looks like PSA is going to be the one that's ultimately going to start doing this. And we might start seeing it sooner than later. So in addition to what are these great values now, in the future we might ultimately see a pop in and out modular system, which in my opinion could completely change the game for Glock. And once people start utilizing them and becoming modular similar to what they do with SIGs, the PSA Dagger could ultimately end up selling more than Glock if they end up doing that and doing it well. So in conclusion, I love the PSA Compact Dagger, and I can see now why so many people fall in love with daggers, and they own multiple daggers. They're very affordable, they're high quality, and they're just everything that Glock should have been that they didn't become, especially around their ergonomics. So when you pick one of these up and fire it, by all means you'll understand what I'm talking about. And again, the only people that this might not apply to would be the people that have really big hands. And again, you might just want to look at the larger version, the Glock 17 type clone version. But in this case, this is, in my opinion, probably a better value, if not the best value in Glocks out on the market today. And it's not a Glock, it's Palmetto State Armory, and they nailed it with the Dagger. So if you like this video or you like this channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.